Hello, everybody who are watching us online. Thanks for tuning in. Delegates, welcome. Hope you like what you see today. I thought I will kick it off with a little bit of storytelling and tell you guys why we do what we do before we start diving deeper into our products and solutions. So, as many of you have seen, we made a significant announcement yesterday. Variety of product and solutions introductions, but also introduction of the Aruba Mobile First platform. I'm not going to tell you what's inside the platform. There are more smarter people in the room who will be joining us to talk about the benefits of it and the use cases. But I want to start with how the platform will be used by a variety of ecosystem partners to improve the experience for mobile users like ourselves, for IT managers like many watching the stream, and business leaders who are dependent on a great IT experience and a great user experience to move their business forward in this new world driven by mobile and IoT. I am Özer Dondurmacıoğlu. I'm part of the product marketing team here at Aruba. You can find me at Oz Wi-Fi. In case you have any comments, questions, feel free to message me on Twitter. So let's get started with a day in the life of a Gen Mobile. What does it mean? How do we improve that experience with the use of the platform? With the use of the platform and through an integration with Microsoft Intune, a cloud-based endpoint mobility management system, I can perhaps bring my own device and roll that device into the corporate infrastructure and have it be secure wherever I go. Policies enforced by our platform. Intune is managing the end user experience. That's at 9 o'clock though. How is my behavior changing at 11? When I'm perhaps welcoming some guests, they show up at my facility, they register, just like you guys have done, jump onto the guest Wi-Fi, it's time to go for a meeting. Instead of booking a meeting room, I can use another app powered by our platform, Robin, to find a meeting room that's closest to us and available, let's say, for the next 30 minutes, directly on my smartphone. Booking a meeting room becomes a thing of the past. I can just do that dynamically on the go. Next, after that meeting, after I have some lunch, maybe I need to access some confidential data. Accessing that confidential data might mean that I connect to the network using increased privileges. So I can integrate with the integration of our platform and a cloud-hosted multi-factor authentication tool, Casada, I can get onto a higher privileged access in the network using my fingerprint or by simply selecting a picture from my library. Later in the day, I'm outside at work. I'm carrying my iPad wherever I go, but Intel Security, specifically endpoint orchestrator tool that can be deployed in private or public clouds, are keeping tabs with the security of the device and the content and the data on that device. In case the security of that device and the identity of that device is compromised, I can let Aruba platform know that that device needs a different level of access, perhaps quarantining access when it comes back to work. Last, I'm going to a very exciting event. At that exciting event, I'm using the app for the venue or for the brand that I'm interacting with. Using the platform again, I can enable micro-location services indoors. That blue dot experience can literally be enabled indoors. That's enabled with the platform, but instantiated, visualized from an end user point of view with a powerful app, let's say with one of our ecosystem partners, Eventbase, where I can actually literally share my location indoors with my friends and I can make myself visible to them and I'm visible to them on demand. That's the experience of Gen Mobile that people are getting accustomed to right now. Some of these experiences that I've highlighted are very much visible in our personal lives, and we believe that those experiences will continue to show up in our work lives. Now let's move on to talking about the IT manager. What do they care about? Simplicity, great security, make sure that things are manageable, and maybe if they can get in front of issues before they happen, that would be really cool as well. So perhaps they're going to rely on Aruba Clarity. They're managing a big mobility infrastructure, big wireless LAN deployment. And with Aruba Clarity, they can actually start testing the network before users can actually plug in. and Peter is going to talk to you a little bit about this, but this is predictive analysis of the network rather than reactive of the network as a matter of troubleshooting. Maybe later in the day, I have lots of devices roaming around, mobile devices, IoT devices. We cannot always trust that the operating system running on those devices, application running on those devices, are going to do the right thing. Maybe due to a user error or due to a latest software update, they're going to start connecting to things, sharing information with servers that we don't want to. So we can take action from the platform after integration Palo Alto. Palo Alto Networks can detect any type of malicious activity on the network and instruct our platform to take action at the edge on the Wi-Fi and the wired networks. Later, I cannot always rely on the fact that some issues can be resolved automatically by the infrastructure and by the platform. I sometimes would like to get notified of major security issues, but I don't want to do that by logging into different systems. I want that to be really accessible on my mobile phone through a really engaging app by PagerDuty. So our platform will summarize, synthesize different set of security incidents, different set of context we receive from the network and from other contextual sources, and present relevant information to the IT folks while they're on the go. Let's take a look at the business leaders, folks who actually make sure that the stage is set up for a great mobile experience and a great IT experience. So these folks clearly want to get more out of the infrastructure nowadays. We're hearing a variety of different examples. In the past, look at the network context just 10 years ago. No mobile devices, no mobile apps, web apps not as sophisticated. The amount of information that we can gather from the infrastructure was very limited. Nowadays, I can actually tell you how many students in a K-12 organization have been using the latest, greatest digital education app on their mobile devices, at which locations, and I can actually help you map that data to their student satisfaction scores or actually student achievement scores. I actually have that data within the infrastructure today. And that's very useful if you can map that use case to a variety of different verticals. So how is my workflow changing? How is my learning life changing? And how can I get right set of context and insights from the infrastructure, from our platform, to make that visible? Making things visible in a physical environment, when people are roaming around and connecting using invisible technologies like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, are a bit of a challenge. But it's turning out to be a very common exercise nowadays. Our customers are using our platform with another integration partner, Event Board. They're actually looking at how much of their meeting rooms, how much of their specific zones in the physical spaces are being used, for how long, and how frequently. And based on that, given the fact that we can be mobile and connect from wherever we are, just like we're doing right now, employees can actually do the same thing by adapting the way they work on an ongoing basis. That means additional cost savings in real estate. That means improved productivity. And by the way, real estate is the second highest P&L, second highest item in any P&L for any business. What that means is we're actually looking for, with the implementation of a fully mobility infrastructure, we might be looking to significantly improve and optimize physical space usage and our spend. Lastly, while we are looking at these venues, maybe we gave an education example, gave an enterprise example, let's look at public venues. Maybe in these venues, there's an opportunity to engage with the end users wherever they are, depending on their location. In an airport, for example, there can be 24 different retail brands. They might all want to engage with their customers and fans at the right time. We might consider sports brands engaging with their visitors on a location basis, improving their experience within the stadium wherever they are. So our Meridian software, as part of our platform, integrates indoor location technologies and highlights how users can get access to special content depending on their location, as well as give business insights to marketing organizations who might be interested in how our users are interacting with the services that I have within this venue, am I spending my money the right way? Is there a better way to engage with people on the most important real estate of today, which is the smartphone? So all these experiences are enabled with the platform. We usually like to talk about why we invest in critical technologies, like the platform and the software component inside, rather than what. So I just wanted to give you a quick sneak preview of why are we investing, continue to invest in a software architecture that is rich enough to program infrastructure hardware in real time so that we can quickly adapt to new mobile and IoT application requirements, and also quickly share context about users, location, app, devices with many different technology vendors out there so that we can continue to innovate at the speed of the ecosystem, improve the life of the Gen Mobile, improve the experience for IT and business. So that's my quick introduction. Hope that provides a little bit of context for a much smarter, much better looking presenter, Peter Lane, who's going to talk to us about Campus WLAN Foundation for the next 10 years. Very bold statement indeed. Peter?
Thank you, Ozer. Hello, I'm Peter, a Director of Product Management here on the AOS software side. Let me slow down a bit. I've got an hour to fill, so we'll be talking for quite some time. We will take questions, but probably kind of at the end of each slide, try and bundle them up for a bit. As we talk about kind of where we've been taking things and what we've been doing, we still go back to some of those core pillars we've been using for a long time. Simplicity, stability, and smartness, right? Everyone knows the easier the network is to set up, the faster you can make a change, the better it is. You guys deal with them all day. You don't want to spend 10 hours changing transmit power. You want that to happen automatically. Things have to be secure. You listen to Ozer talk forever. Everyone knows wireless is the primary method of connection. I won't talk about it too much, but the question is, how do you keep the network up as much as physically possible, never have any downtime? And that's something we've been addressing in multiple points as we carried through with AOS 8. And then the last piece, how much can we automate? How much can we take out of your hands and just make happen as you would want for you? Still give you the visibility into why it's happening and when it's happening so you can change it and turn it off if you're not happy, but reduce some of that stress and let the network fix itself. So as we've kept those in mind, as we've built AOS 8, AOS 8 does have some significant changes and enhancements towards what we've built. Obviously, you all remember the day of the autonomous FAT APs. You had to configure each one individually. It was a lot of work to bring up a wireless network. Back in 2002, controllers came in. They started to aggregate all that information up, centralize some of the data plane, control plane management, make it much easier to manage a large network. When we built those out at Aruba, we also introduced the master controller. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but basically it starts to aggregate information across multiple controllers, becomes one central config point to push out to all those controllers. You can put 10,000 AP networks under a single master, so you have one place to configure, one place for all the RF information to be shared, the security data to come, and really give you a simple, scalable network. That was great when we first launched, but over the last 10 years, wireless is used much more heavily, and there are a lot of newer services that are coming out. Things like UCC optimization, Air Group, AppRF, Client Match are all trying to run in that network appliance hardware. We were starting to see the limits of that, right? It's not built for general purpose computing. It's got a small RAM footprint. It doesn't have any persistent storage. That was starting to hold back some of the services and the features we could build into the wireless network. So with that, with AOS 8, we've made some significant changes. We're introducing a new product called the Mobility Master that really is an evolution, the next generation of our master controller. We're taking that master controller out of a network appliance and putting it into an x86 box. So there will be an x86 appliance that gives us more CPU, more memory, more storage to really tackle these larger service problems. Now that we're also in an x86 box, we're introducing virtualization. So that Mobility Master can run in a VMware environment or shortly in a KVM environment. So it doesn't have to be a physical box, which has been a common request from our customers. As we did that, we've also virtualized the local controllers. So the local controllers are still doing all the data plane management. They're just not doing as many of the services. Those services have been brought up. So the data plane management can still happen in a hardware appliance, which is where you're going to see the best encryption, the best throughput. Our 7240 still has about 40 gigs of firewall through it. But if you want, you can move that into a virtual world. You can run that in VMware and KVM. You get a smaller amount of throughput, 4 or 5 gigs, but you still get very large numbers of APs and clients because you have a lot of CPU and memory there to help you out. So those are two of the really large shifts. One of the other shifts that came in is kind of some of the assumptions around where an AP is terminating and where a user is terminating. In the old world, a user always went through its AP, terminated on the same controller as its AP, and AP terminated on one controller. With AOS 8, users on the same AP can be spread across 4 different controllers. So we can actually load balance users. And the APs themselves don't have to terminate all their traffic on a single controller. You can have SSID 1 go to controller 1, SSID 2 go to controller 2. Those 2 changes, kind of breaking some of the old assumptions and kind of restrictions we'd put in place to make things really easy early on, enable a great deal of flexibility and kind of the feature sets and the deployment models that we can build out. So that's really what we've been focusing on and working heavily with AOS 8, and we're launching today. So if I look at that simplified setup, one of the first things we've done is zero-touch provisioning. So we've had zero-touch provisioning on our APs for a while. We've extended that into the controllers. So this isn't just branch controllers, it's also campus controllers. Whenever you plug that controller in, it'll reach out to activate, figure out who it should be talking to, create a secure connection back to them, and get its full config from the mobility master. This makes the mobility master the single source of truth, the single place to configure. Everything automatically pulls down from it, just making it easier to deploy a network. One of the other restrictions we've removed with Mobility Master is today under a master controller, everything needs to be running the same version of code. Mobility Master is much more intelligent. It can actually manage multiple versions of firmware. Now the Mobility Master will need to be on the latest version so that it understands all the features that are out there. But if it's on AOS 8.3, it can manage controllers on 8.1, 8.2. The benefits of that is it means when a new version of code comes out, you can roll it out slowly. Now, one of the key things, the Mobility Master is not in the data path. If you upgrade it, you're not taking down your network. You're not breaking the data flows that are going through. So you can upgrade the Mobility Master independently to the new release, start using it, pick a single site, a single controller, upgrade it, test it for a week, test it for a month, burn it in for 6 months, however long you want, and then start to roll it out to the rest of your network when you are ready. We got a lot of feedback that it's really important to be able to do those things slowly and safely, so we're making that easier. The next one we're calling multi-zone. This goes back to the fact I was talking about the APs no longer terminate all their traffic on the same controller. So you can have different SSIDs terminating in different places. This really gives you multi-tenancy in the AP. The initial use case we envisioned were high security networks. I can have an extremely high security network and a low security network, live on the same AP, but terminate on different controllers. That gives you a huge kind of air gap, air wall for the data. Because one important thing to remember in the Aruba solution, we typically operate in tunnel mode. In tunnel mode, the encryption goes from the client to the controller. So what that means with multi-zone, I can sniff the traffic over the air, I can sniff the traffic on the wire on the other side of the AP, or even inside the AP if I tried to steal the traffic. It would be encrypted the whole way through. So I get complete security separation, and it's not decrypted until it hits that separate controller. So on my primary controller, where I could put, say, my high security SSID, that primary controller has full control over the access point. It chooses IP address, radio, transmit power, everything, except that secondary SSID. The second controller gets to configure the second SSID and the security mechanisms for it. So it can have full control over its network without impacting the neighboring network. Obviously, this goes beyond just config into monitoring. That secondary SSID doesn't get to know anything about the users on the first SSID or what that SSID is, and vice versa. As I mentioned, it was originally for our high security federal customers that would want to run top secret class networks and regular secure networks through the same access point. Traditionally, that's meant deploying 2 wireless networks, twice as many APs, too much co-channel interference, too many APs and radios beaconing. All of that goes away with multi-zone. That was our initial use case. We've seen a lot more interest in guest networks. Instead of running it through the controller and then tunneling it out to the DMZ, put a second controller in the DMZ and know that that traffic is completely separate. It's not just firewalled, it's actually encrypted separately and carried through separately. Any questions on that one? Because that one's actually pretty cool. I'm going to pause here for questions for a minute. Yeah.
What about a failure? What happens in a failure if you're running different versions? Are you going to have like mismatch code or have like a slow conversion of the APs as they try to download the new code?
hold on to that one. The next slide is stability, and it's all about failure management. But basically, we'll start talking about clustering a little bit. And when you're within a cluster, you do need to be running the same version of code. So that if one controller fails, the APs will seamlessly just carry over to the next, not have to upgrade or downgrade. And one of the big things we've done with clustering is start doing stateful failover, where we're actually sharing user session state across, so the users don't have to reauth either. But a little preview of what's coming next. So multi-zone is really something we're very excited about, has some big implications. And then the last one, just a new UI. When we're talking about simplicity, anyone who's used an Aruba network knows it's incredibly powerful, it's incredibly advanced, very feature-rich, not exactly simple. We're coming in and we're changing that. So new UI gives a new look and feel, but also a new config model. So we still have the profiles underneath that you can reuse all the config you want, but it's now a hierarchical-based config. So I can inherit from above and just override what I need. And we've abstracted away a lot of the profiles in the UI. So you can just click through, turn on what you want, without having to know that profile structure by heart. This should really reduce the amount of time it takes to ramp on the Aruba solution and learn how to use it, how to deploy it. And it should make it much easier to make kind of moves, adds, changes, and adapt to what's out there. So with that, I'm actually going to jump over into a quick demo of some of the new UI to give you a feel for what that looks like. And here we go. So this is the mobility master. New UI, left style navigation. So over here on the left, I can see that I'm drilled into a specific 7210 controller that's in the Sunnyvale folder of my managed network. I have kind of the dashboard information. I can jump into configuration. If I head over to configuration, I can see all the WLANs that apply to this 7210. You can see there's 3, a Mesh 801, Test, and Ozer network. This is a test mobility master that we're running. But if I hop up to Sunnyvale, I see there's only 2 of them. 2 of these have been inherited down to the 7210, and 1 has been defined directly on the 7210. I can come in and add a new one. You'll see it looks similar to Instant, as we were focusing on the ease of use. But I can come in and make all kind of the detailed decisions I need to make at the same time. So I'm going to set up a guest network just because it's quicker to run through. Well, I'll leave it employee. I get some basic information. Do I want to broadcast? Do I want to tunnel, detunnel, broadcast my SSID? I can choose my VLAN. Right now, there's only one VLAN defined. If I want, I can jump into more of the advanced features, see all of my VLANs, create new name VLANs, new VLAN IDs if I need it. But one of the themes we've tried to carry through is to hide that level of detail until you need it. So we can keep it simple, easy for the basic users, but still let the advanced users dive into what they want. Then we ask for the type of security. Obviously, if I was setting up enterprise, I'd need some Radius servers and a few others. I'll drop down to open just because that makes life a little cleaner. And then I get to choose my role. As you guys know, the policy enforcement firewall, PEF, in the controller is kind of a key piece of everything we do. I can decide the role that this user should get. I can also take a look at what all these roles mean. What exactly is the authenticated role I'm looking at, or the guest role? What rules apply? So here I can see the individual rules that are for this role. I can also apply global rules, though. If I want all users to not be able to use Facebook, I can come in and set that application rule and block Facebook. I wouldn't do that, but you could, right? You get those options. You can deny, you can permit, you can apply quality of service, all that sort of good stuff from the firewall. Set that up here, one place as you're setting up the WLAN. You're not going to 15 different profiles and 10 different screens as you go through and build everything. So now I have pending changes. I'm going to discard those changes, since those are just kind of a setup, and hop back out to the beginning. I mentioned that you can still get to all the detailed profiles. So here I can go look into one of the AP groups for a MISH test. Let's go to MISH test 1 where we have an AP. But if I want to, I can still look at that detailed WLAN. And if I click over here on the profiles link, I can still get to those detailed profiles that my Aruba customers are used to. I can dive into exactly what's in the AP system profile and start to configure any of those details quickly, easily, and in a straightforward fashion. We tried to give you as much as possible. But like the radio screen, we've combined 3 or 4 different profiles. So I can choose my radio mode, which is my radio profile. I can choose my transmit power out of my ARM profile and my valid channels out of my regulatory domain profile, all in one place to make it kind of simple and easy. And graphically, we tried to make it a little more clear what channels you're using when. Kind of click, select the channels that you want, get a feel for where things are applying and where they're not. I mentioned the hierarchy over here, kind of inheriting down. I also do have a mobility master object, so this is the manager that I can come in and configure and make any changes to I want. Any questions on that? Okay.
How's the mobile support for the browser on Aruba OS 8?
Much better.
Better?
It has much more of a responsive UI that will kind of rescale. Still not quite as perfect. There's a lot of information in there, and seeing that on a 4-inch screen, you can't really get through all the profiles. But like for iOS, it should be great. So, reliability. Coming back to this one. One of the features that we've built in is called controller clustering. So basically, you nominate a bunch of controllers to be in a cluster together. They'll be running the same version of code. You can do up to 12 7200 series in one cluster. When you do that, they will start kind of kicking in for stateful failover automatically. Basically what happens is, you're probably familiar with the AP fast failover that we've had for a while. The AP brings up its tunnel to its primary controller that's doing all of its configuration, and it has a secondary controller that it brings up a tunnel to. It just doesn't use it until the primary goes down. The AP can detect that in, I believe it's about 800 milliseconds, so it takes a little while to detect it and fail over. But the controllers are talking to each other and can detect that very, very rapidly and fail over an AP if needed. Historically, or in AOS 6, the client was then deauthed and had to reauth to get back on the network. With AOS 8, we've divorced the AP from having to terminate on the same controller as the client. So that client might already be on controller 2, and when controller 1 goes down, nothing happens to it. It just keeps going to controller 2. But on top of that, the persistent TCP sessions are actually getting shared across to a backup controller for that client. So the backup controller already knows the auth state, the role, and any kind of persistent TCP sessions. So things like a Skype call won't notice an impact, video won't notice an impact, your FTP sessions will just keep flowing through if there is a controller failover. Network doesn't go down, everything just keeps flowing. So that's one of the really cool things that came with clustering. One of the other things we did when we built clustering and how users didn't have to terminate on the same controller as their AP, we added in user load balancing. So there's a primary controller that gets decided automatically for you in that cluster, and it will allocate kind of MAC address ranges to get assigned to the different controllers. If it sees one controller getting more users than the others by about 5 or 10%, it'll start to move those MAC address buckets around to make sure you get an even user distribution load, which also gives you a pretty even data distribution load through the network. So if you have a large campus and all of a sudden there's a massive sporting event and you end up with 6,000 users in an area where you usually have 300, you don't have to worry about those 6,000 users crushing your controller. It's clustered, those users are spread across your entire network.
Is that whole process predictable?
Yes.
So I know which is going to be the master. I know where the failovers are going to occur.
Yes. So there are a couple different things. The primary and the backup controller is a known state that's actually shared up to Airwave, and it'll be visible in Airwave a little later this year, and it's currently visible on the controller. So you can see the primary and the backup controller for each user and know if this controller were to go down, where would that user go? On top of that, you can get a feel for what the buckets are. So you can see where the buckets have been assigned for the VPN tunnel creation, or for the tunnel creation, I should say. So I mentioned, MAC address 1 could end up on MAC addresses ending in 1 could go to controller 1, ending in 2 to controller 2, ending in 3 could go to controller 1 and kind of split off. You can see what that list is. That list may shift as we load balance users, but you can still see what's there. And it is predictable kind of down to the APs. That primary controller will share down to the APs what that hash looks like, or that mapping of which MAC address goes to which AP, and build that up. So there is visibility into it, and it's predictable, but it will adapt and change based on your networking environment to make sure things stay healthy.
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually really cool. We're very proud of that one. It's working really well from everything we've seen. The other benefit of this is giant campuses. Most of our customers aren't a big enough issue to notice any roaming. Right? A lot of customers can be covered by a single controller. 1,000 APs is a very large set. 2,000 APs, even larger. But we have large universities that may have 10,000, 12,000 access points. Today, when you go from one controller to another, you'll typically reauth, get a new IP address. Or you turn on layer 3 mobility and the new controller builds up a tunnel to the previous controller and you get a whole bunch of these layer 3 tunnels running around. Scale gets a little rough, gets complicated to troubleshoot. With this model, each AP can build up to 12 tunnels, one per controller, and then it'll just shove the users through that tunnel as needed. It'll build those tunnels only when there's users that need it. So if you have very light load on the network, it won't bother with the tunnel. But if I have 100 users on the AP, there's a good chance that tunnel is just going to be up and stay up regardless of the users that are there. So it's a much more deterministic tunnel environment with a much smaller set of tunnels that are there. But the end result is if that user is terminating on controller 2, I can roam anywhere on campus across 12 controllers, and my traffic still goes back to controller 2. I'm never reauthing, I'm never getting a new IP address, I'm never really roaming from that mobility anchor point of view. I'm just moving across APs that all know how to talk back to my controller and send my data there. So it can give you a really, really strong, giant campus roaming experience. Any other questions on clustering?
Do you need to have like an even number of controllers for the XOR process to work?
No.
On MAC addresses?
No,
Okay.
You can have an odd number. That's fine. For the clustering, I mentioned we support 12 controllers. That is on a 7200 series. You can have 12 of those. If you're doing it on a 7000 series, which is our smaller controllers, you can do up to 4. We expect that mostly for lab environments, testing, things you guys might set up to play around with, not so much for large deployments. And we don't recommend that we don't allow you to mix and match. It doesn't make sense to take a 16 AP 7005 and put it in a cluster with a 2000 AP 7240. From a scale point of view, they just really don't fail over or make sense. So that's kind of where we drew the line. 7200 series together or 7000 series together. Or virtual mobility controller together. That's something I mentioned briefly in the previous slide, but we do allow for virtual mobility controllers now. They will be showing up on the price list probably in November. We're still working on the exact price list date, but you get all the same features that you have in the hardware-based controller, just running in a VM environment.
So it's got full feature parity?
Complete feature parity.
Really?
I'm trying to think if there's a single feature that's not there. I'm afraid saying complete feature parity, but 99.99% feature parity. So we still support tunnel node, air match, client match, app RF, UCC, VPN termination, all of the things a controller does, zero touch provisioning, all that sort of stuff. Michael, do you know of anything we don't support? Yeah.
Is there any major performance hit in any one area?
Throughput.
That's it?
Throughput is the biggest one because we use networking processors that are designed to do encryption. On an Intel chip, even when we use the DPDK, when we start doing the encryption and the DPI, we get 3, 4, 5 gigs of throughput depending on the CPU, which is significantly lower than we see on a large controller. But we feel that restriction has been somewhat alleviated with clustering. So you do have the option, you can bring up one VM. If you start to get up near 4 gigs of throughput, bring up a second VM, add it to the cluster. You don't even have to move your APs over. Your users will start to balance and it'll take up some of that throughput. So you've effectively doubled the amount of throughput you have. Add another for redundancy. And the way we're structuring our VM licenses, we're not charging you how many VM servers you bring up. We're charging you for the capacity of APs that you're managing. So if you buy a VM license for, or I think it's going to be I'm going to try and get the name right, a mobility controller virtual appliance license for 1,000 APs, you can apply that on the mobility master and you'll get the centralized licensing feature to kick in.
You could have 500 VMs all running 2 APs each.
Yes, I could have one doing 1,000. I could do 2, 500, 500 with full redundancy, or I could be a distributed enterprise and bring up one in each individual site with 2 APs there. To us, the important thing is how many APs are you managing, how big is your network, bringing that back to Mobility Master. Now, if you're running that VM without a Mobility Master or without access to one, you apply the license directly to the VM, and then you're limited to whatever that license number is. But if you apply it to Mobility Master, you get that flexibility to deploy what you need when you need it. which is why when I was saying just add another VM, it's literally, you don't even talk to us. If your VM stack has an extra server lying around, drop it in, you've got more throughput.
So are you seeing, like, in the future where we just dynamically spin up additional controllers as we need more load or more throughput?
That would be a really cool feature. So we're not quite there yet. The AP load balancing isn't there, but that's something that would be very interesting for us to build, and we would be very excited to build.
You said right now it's VMware, KVM coming soon.
Yes, so KVM, we're adding support in 8.0.1, and the virtual mobility controller itself is coming in 8.0.1, which will be in a few months.
You could potentially orchestrate that yourself.
We could. You can see we've done a lot of work in here. There have been huge changes to kind of the data flow, the kind of assumptions we were making on where traffic is going, clustering got added in, moving to x86. So it really is, when Ozer said kind of the foundation for the next 10 years, this really was kind of the foundation of the architecture. Everything that you're talking about are things we've thought about and we just haven't been able to get to yet. And they're things we want to grow into, and this architecture gives us the ability to get there. And that's why we're really, really excited about it.
Can you add a virtual appliance to a hardware cluster?
Today we've only tested virtual appliance, virtual cluster, hardware appliance, hardware cluster. We have some testing to do and some work to do to get there. So I can't give you a complete answer, but it's something we're looking at.
Okay.
Cool.
Quick question.
Yes.
A lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
When it comes to troubleshooting a client issue, can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure.
I mean, because all these tunnels and different controllers in the cluster and all that.
So all this information is going to be making it up into Airwave. So Airwave will give you the ability to see what is my cluster, how many controllers are there, what's the throughput, does it have scale, how are they performing? And on an individual client, you'll be able to see who's my primary controller, who's my backup controller. While there are moving parts, I don't really expect users to get load balanced every 5 minutes, right? We're talking a difference of 5 or 10% of user count on the controller. So for larger controllers like a 7240, 5% of 32,000 is you need to have 1,000 users delta before you start load balancing. So it shouldn't happen all the time, but it should be there to kind of be a safety net. And just like controllers shouldn't go down all the time, so you shouldn't be falling over to your backup. That should be a rare event. So it should still be very predictive and give you a very good feel, but you will have all the visibility into the backup in Airwave. All of that is also on the controller, so you do have the option to drop into the CLI and look around in the CLI. There's a large set of features that didn't make it into this list that we're going over. They're not giant boulders. One of which is in the CLI, we added profile name tab completion, finally. It was one of the largest requests from our customer base, so we were very excited to get that in. We also multi-threaded the CLI. So if you run a tar-log tech support, you don't have to wait for that to finish before you issue other commands to start debugging. So we've definitely had a focus on debugging. There's a lot more visibility in the CLI. You have that option. We're just trying to make sure our average users don't have to use that option and get it all into Airwave. Any other questions? Okay. Another one is Clarity. So Ozer mentioned this. Hopefully many of you have seen the kind of Clarity Live beta on Airwave. So the idea behind Clarity was we got tired of hearing everything is wireless's fault. Why is the wireless network broken? Help me troubleshoot it. Historically, we'd always done the RF, right? If we went back those 10 years to 2002, people only expected us to troubleshoot the RF. Everything else was the wired side's problem. Now that wireless is the primary method, if DHCP isn't working, it's the wireless team's problem. DNS isn't working, it's the wireless team's problem. So we've added Clarity Live, which gives visibility into all of that wired traffic. Well, all those kind of network services, I should say. Basically, every DNS request, DHCP request that goes through the controller gets timestamped. All the responses get timestamped. We keep track of which servers are responding and when. So we get a great view into the live data through your network and how healthy things are. The problem is remote sites, you don't always have a user. 2 a.m., you don't always have a user. You can't tell and make sure the network is up. So we're introducing Clarity Synthetic, which gives you the ability to have a radio associate to a neighboring AP and run a bunch of tests through the network. When that happens, you get all the great association tests. I can associate, authenticate, get an IP address, get DNS. Then we can ping back through to a known system, make sure ping works, run trace routes, see that they're healthy. Then we can do iPerf. Just do a baseline RF performance test to get a feel for what's out there. Now, it won't be exactly what your end users see, because you sitting on the table have a different RF path to that access point than those two APs that have line of sight on the ceiling. We understand that, but we'll have a baseline for those two APs today and last week. And you can look at the graph and see how they compare and know, has things gotten worse? Have things gotten better? Have they changed? We're also going to add in we've also added in the ability to do web page load. So you can specify a URL. We use Salesforce. I can say, does Salesforce load in under 3 seconds? Now, I don't know why Salesforce isn't loading in over 3 seconds. It could be their servers are slow. It could be my WAN is congested, or it could be an RF problem. The important thing is we're trying to identify that end user experience issue before they call in. Because a lot of times they don't call in. They just complain amongst themselves. I mean, everyone's had that problem where Outlook isn't working, and instead of calling IT, we complain to the guy sitting next to us. Can't believe Outlook's broken again. Why isn't the server responding? Right? It's just human nature. So we want to be able to test that, see that it's happening, and report on it ahead of time so that you can get those kind of alerts and visibility. So with Clarity Synthetic, there are a few different things going on. Obviously, we had to make some changes to the AP code so that the AP is capable of running these tests. We're also introducing a Clarity server, which is really the testing endpoint. So that'll be just part of the solution, and it comes up. You'll install it as a separate VM, but that's where your iPerf tests will terminate. That's where your pings will terminate. So you can get very deterministic tests and not worry that running a report on Airwave is affecting my iPerf results. So it'll be kind of a segmented, separated area for now. Any questions on Clarity? Was this all stuff you're fairly familiar with? We've been very excited about Clarity for a while, so we haven't been good at keeping that one a secret.
Which test does the test server support? Just iPerf?
So the test server, whenever you're running synthetic, the test server is actually using the radio and the AP as an extension of the server. So it's sending the .11 frames over the wire out. So it's actually involved in all the tests. Ping, traceroute, iPerf, association, page load, everything is originating from there. Now, as you can imagine, since that is a Linux box running a VM, we actually have a very large suite of tools we could run now that we essentially have a remote radio that we control through the server. So there's a lot of stuff we want to add into that. We're not quite there yet. Again, foundation for where we want to go. But we could, in theory, eventually get to the point where we're actually running a live Skype call through the network, or running custom tests through the network where you script up whatever you want Linux to do, and it'll go do it and print out the results. Those are long-term visions. We're not there yet. Today is that set that I was talking about. Ping, traceroute, iPerf, page load, DHCP, DNS, authentication. That sort of kind of core stuff to make sure the network's up. We think it's a pretty good list and a good start.
And Peter, using your Salesforce example, you're saying we don't know where that bottleneck is, but if I have a full Aruba network, can I see that whole path that radio's talking to from like switch to switch, and between these switches is where we're seeing that latency issue?
So another area where we're not quite there yet, but would make perfect sense, would be for switches to start to be a part of Clarity as well. That would be a wonderful roadmap item for us. But we're not quite there in this launch today.
Thanks.
I might have missed it, but did you mention anything about scheduling some of those tests out?
So the scheduling piece actually won't be part of the Clarity server. Okay. That'll be part of Airwave. And I'm trying not to talk too much roadmap. It's hard because we get really excited. The person I would ask about that is actually up next, talking about Central, Pej. Ask him a few Clarity softball questions, and he may be able to throw in some answers. Cool. So then one of the last pieces is in-service upgrades of services. So with the Mobility Master, we have a lot more compute and memory. I keep saying that, and I keep coming back to that because that allows us to do a lot more. So things like Air Group has been brought from the controller into Mobility Master. Client match decision-making logic is stored in the Mobility Master. A few other things have been pulled up. With this, I can now upgrade those chunks of logic without upgrading the OS on the controller or the AP. So if iOS 11 were to come out And for some reason, the Apple devices started behaving very strangely and not working with client match. We could come out with a new version of client match that updated, used them more effectively. You could apply that change to the mobility master by doing an in-service upgrade of client match. You would not upgrade your controllers. You would not upgrade your APs. Your network would never go down. Client match would just get interrupted for a minute or two, start back up, and then have the new behavior. So we're moving to the model of being able to upgrade some of the intelligence and the functions of the network and the decision-making process without affecting the controllers and the APs. Now, obviously, that won't be everything, right? If I'm changing when I make a move, I can do that without affecting anything. If I change how, the controllers and the APs are going to have to update, right? When it's some of that data path and they need new hooks that they haven't had before. So there will still be the occasional upgrade that does require a controller or an AP to be updated, but we'll be able to make some changes without it. This goes back to that stability, right? There are a few reasons networks go down. We're to the point where a controller outage causes no impact. If you have a switch outage, our AP335 gives you hitless PoE failover and just starts using the second PoE port without rebooting. If you have an AP outage, your clients roam to the neighboring AP because you should have good coverage, so you have multiple APs in any spot. And now if you have that kind of left, the planned network outages where I'm going to make changes and upgrades. And with this, we can reduce those. Not fully eliminate them, but reduce them. So we're trying to knock down each one of those one by one to make sure the network can really, truly be up as much as possible for our users. Any questions on any of that? Back too far. I know we had some as we went. Just wanted to make sure. How am I doing on time? 21 minutes. OK, perfect. So then kind of automation and extensibility. Air match is another very large feature we're introducing with AOS 8. You're all familiar with ARM and kind of the channel and the transmit power planning we've done for a very long time. When ARM was built, it was a different world. It's a strange thing to say, but when we built ARM, RF was not ubiquitous. We weren't congested on every channel all the time. People weren't carrying around 4 or 5 devices with them on the network all the time. IoT wasn't a thing. We weren't worried about my watch and the refrigerator and my shoes deciding to be on the wireless network. All of that has changed. And with that, that means every channel is busy pretty much all the time. So the original ARM we had built was really designed around finding the best channel for you, the healthiest one. With Air Match, we flipped that a little bit, and we're now prioritizing kind of channel reuse, making sure we have good use of all the available spectrum, even if that channel isn't perfect, because we need to spread out and make sure we're using everything that's there. So with ARM, there were kind of 2 different modes the AP ran in. There was when no one was associated to the radio, and it would hop to the best channel as fast as possible, as often as possible. And then there were users associated, in which case we only changed when there were issues on the network. We've kept that user association behavior. If we see problems on the networks, we still move away from it. But each radio will not be trying to optimize itself all the time. We'll look at the system as a whole. So Mobility Master is actually starting to do the math of looking at sets of 50 APs. What is the best combination of transmit power, channel, and channel width for this environment to give me the most channel reuse and the most capacity and the best network? So it's a slightly different function. We're doing that on a regular basis, but not every minute. Right? Once a day, we're going to go through, look at all the traffic we saw over the last day, all the RF information we saw over the last day, and pick what's going to be the best distributed channel system, channel plan for that network. If it's better, we apply it. Then if issues arise, DFS, the radio will still change independently. But the network as a whole is planned together on a regular basis. And the big thing that we've been adding in for us is channel width. Historically, we've said if you're in a dense environment, like a 500-person lecture hall, go 20 megahertz channels. If you're in a sparse environment, go 80 megahertz. Somewhere in between, go 40. Now we actually pay attention, and the APs listen to how many other APs they hear around them, how dense the environment is, and they make the decision between 20, 40, and 80 megahertz. And again, I know you're going to ask, all that information is being logged, shared. You can see every time we make a channel change, why we made the change. All that will be in Airwave. So we're excited about that. We think it's really going to be more effective in kind of the dense environments and the complicated RF environments that we're seeing today. than ARM's channel and transit power planning has been. So ARM, just so you guys know the terms, we use them. ARM is still our overall radio management term. Air match is going to be kind of the channel, transmit power, channel width planning. Client match is the client steering piece. So client match and air match are part of ARM.
Is that going to be tunable at all? Like if there are certain areas where it may not be reacting exactly how I want it to?
Yes. We're going to be following very much the same philosophy we did with client match. In the UI, it's going to seem like there's one button because we don't want people tuning it and breaking everything. In the CLI, you can get in and tune whatever you want and make whatever tweaks you want. So you'll still have some lower level knobs that you can touch, but in general, we're going to try and keep you from tuning as much as possible by having a good decision process.
In the CLI, will you be able to get a lot of insight as to why it's making its decision?
That I have to double check. I'm not sure how much detail the solver keeps. So the solver will come through and we calculate some internal synthetic metrics for channel reuse and overall health. That'll be visible. I'm not sure we'll be able to see for each individual AP why this channel was chosen versus the one next to it. Because it's trying to look at all of them together, and that becomes a very large, complicated web of signal strengths to other APs when it's making decisions like that. If it's an event, if it's a DFS event or an interference event that causes a channel change, that you would definitely see. But when the solver comes through, I'm not sure we're going to be able to give that detail. So as you can imagine, that one's taken us a fair amount of time. We know, as you all know, it's a complicated thing to get right. And so we've been spending a lot of time on it, a lot of work there. Another thing that we've heard is there's a desire to work with other systems out there. So with Mobility Master, we're aggregating a ton of context. Was anyone familiar with the ALE product, the ALE product from Aruba? Okay, perfect. Those APIs that we had in ALE, which were designed to give you the full context of the user, not just username, IP address, signal strength, but also applications, role, throughput, how much traffic they sent to Facebook, all that sort of stuff was available in ALE. Those core APIs have been moved into Mobility Master. So you no longer need to install a separate server to get that out. Now we're not doing the location calculation of ALE. That piece is not there. That's very resource intensive. It needs to be separate. But the APIs are there. So if you want to integrate this with any other system, we have REST-based APIs that you can go in and pull the information that you want. Or we have a kind of a publish-subscribe model where it's a 0MQ data feed with protobuf formatted data that'll just come out and give you all the context of the users. You can build your own database, store all of it, parse it however you want, do whatever you want with it. A lot of our large customers, I mean our extremely large customers, 10,000 APs and above, are very interested in getting access to that data and starting to play around with it. But we're not just sending data out. We've also added config APIs. So we can allow you to reach in and configure the network in a programmatic way through Mobility Master. Again, some of our large customers, our service provider customers, really wanted the ability to script up their own system and then just have APIs to reach into to configure the network, set up SSIDs, set up authentications, all that sort of stuff. So that's in there as well. We're pretty excited about that. We think it opens up a lot of possibilities, and we'll see where people want to take it. And then the last one is an enhancement to AppRF. So you're all probably familiar with AppRF. It does full deep packet inspection, web content filtering, IP reputation, geolocation. Now we've added the ability to kind of custom classify URLs so you get your own app definitions for web apps. So if you have internal websites that you've built or internal tools that you've used, you can now classify those. Additionally, you can build your own custom app categories. So if students use 5 different apps, you can add those 5 different apps into the student category and prioritize it in a certain way, or do whatever you want with it as a set of apps. If you add a new one, you can just drop it into that category, not have to worry about it. Another thing we did with Mobility Master is the updates to app definitions can now be updated like antivirus updates. You don't have to get a new version of AOS code. You don't have to upgrade your network. You can just pull in that app update, apply it. and it'll push down to the controllers, and you'll get new definitions and classifications. So again, going back to trying to eliminate reasons for downtime, reasons for upgrade, make it easier to improve the network without causing issues. There are a few other features that didn't make it in here. Well, there's a host of them. We added IP fix support. We added Jabber visibility into the UCC side. I mentioned the multi-threaded CLI, the tab completion of profile names. We've been doing a fair amount on branch over the last few years. So we added WAN link aggregation on the back of a controller to go with the policy-based routing, WAN health check, link failover, and a few other things that we've built into those controllers. One of the other kind of subtle shifts on the configuration side, master controllers used to push down just the global config. You still had local config that you had to configure directly on the local controllers. That's gone. Mobility Master completely configures everything on any controller underneath it. So you don't have to worry about doing anything on the locals with the zero-touch provisioning.
You said the tab completion of profiles. I saw that, and I don't think that gets enough spotlight.
It doesn't. It's one of those that's tough because it's really only people that have used the Aruba system know how valuable it is. So for anyone who hasn't, we have profiles in the system where you set up your radio profile. You name it whatever you want. And I could say, this is the 1344 building. I could say 1344 radio profile. Now, every time I want to make a change to all of the radios that are in this building, I just update that profile. Very powerful, very easy. It just became a pain to remember when I'm typing out 1344, did I capitalize radio? Did I lowercase it? Did I get every single character in? Now you hit 1344, hit tab, we fill out the rest of it. We've done tab completion on commands for a while, but we weren't doing it on kind of the user-definable profile names. We've added that in, which we're really excited about. Small thing, but we've been hearing it from customers for a long time, so we're very excited to roll that out, which is why I brought it up. Marketing is like, it's not big enough. It's not a cool feature, but I think it's a pretty awesome simplicity benefit for what's out there. I don't know if I mentioned IP fix support is coming in with Mobility Master. Probably a few other things, but I think that's about it. Any questions on all that? I think we took a lot as we went, but.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully you're half as excited as we are about this. And that bold statement that Ozer made of foundation for the next 10 years, you can start to see why he made it, hopefully. That it really is a platform we can grow on. It gives us a much larger direction and a lot more freedom to really innovate and build new cool stuff. Cool. Thank you.
All right, guys. Good to see everybody. My name's Charlie Clemmer. I know quite a few people either in person or at least from the Twitters and that kind of stuff. I'm with SkyFi, Senior Director of Systems Engineering, so working on the technical side of how we do what we do. I'll run through a little bit, but what's important, I think, is SkyFi started off as that guest Wi-Fi, guest analytics, retail marketing type of platform. Ultimately, as we get into more of the API and the flexibility in the infrastructure itself, we're able to take it beyond just being that I do a captive portal and I can get you online and we can send you to a web portal or to an ad, and really make this more about either a business efficiency, business optimization, customer experience, customer sat type of engagement. So as we look at it, SkyFi effectively is a product. We have three pieces. We start off with the IO Connect, which is basically kind of that first piece that you think about, right? It's how do I get connected to the Wi-Fi? It's the captive portal page if we're using one, et cetera. But I'll take it a step further, and it's actually where we start to get that API feed. So how we're pulling stats from the radios, how we're pulling it from the infrastructure, letting me know. But we'll also turn it around a little bit different, and I can look for things like integration with ClearPass to take this to where it's not the nasty buzzword of it's a captive portal and I'm making my guest Wi-Fi have a bit more friction, but I'm taking it and using it to pull in authentication through Active Directory. I know some additional information. I didn't have to get it from a captive portal, and we'll use that as part of our intelligence. Inside is really the analytics dashboard, so it's some of the kind of basic table stakes that I think most of us are familiar with. I'll talk a little bit more about it and get into a demo to show it, and really the bulk of this will come out of the demo side, how we're using it. but it's taking that information that we then feed in through ClearPass, through AIL, as Peter mentioned earlier, pulling in some of the location data out of Airwave, connecting in through a mobile phone app, so something like the Meridian, where I'm leveraging beacons that even though they don't necessarily talk through AIL or they don't talk back to me directly, we're able to pull in some additional information and make this a bit more content rich. And then I get into Engage, and this is really kind of the meat and potatoes of it, where we make it worthwhile and go in with it. So it's doing things like the retail example, since that's where we started, but ultimately this could be doing a public safety type notification, or letting me know that, letting maintenance know that I have an escalator that's gone out of service and I need to have looked at, or my elevators aren't working, or something along those lines. So as I get into the demo here, take me 1 second to get logged in. And I'm going to I want to show two different environments here that'll be interesting, I think. So I started off talking about, let me zoom in here. Either way. There's two different pieces. There's the first part on the connect, so it's pulling in the information, letting me know what's going on. We start off, some of the stats I think are pretty basic. Again, kind of the table stakes, right? It's looking for visitors. From my perspective, visitors would be an unassociated client. So it's that smartphone in my pocket, it's my watch that I turned off Bluetooth, and so it's looking for a network. It's all those devices that I don't know anything about. I may not know a lot about them, but there's still some useful information that I can gather out of them, so we're going to report those. The next piece is kind of obvious. It's the sessions, right? It's the people that get connected to guests. I want to know how many people connected, how long they were on, what they were doing. I'm going to start to do a breakout where I can look for things like dwell time. So dwell time is pretty self-explanatory, the average length of time, but I want to look at it in a couple of different ways. If I mention that unassociated users or visitors are a little unique, I may want to break out my dwell time for visitors versus clients, right? Some of the conversations we'll have, you look at different client behaviors, and I know we've got a lot of resources that track how clients behave and how often do they probe and what do they do when they're in different sleep states. This becomes kind of that key part. My end goal is I'd like to have as many people on Wi-Fi as I can get on there. I get better information when they're on Wi-Fi. But if people won't connect or they just don't know my Wi-Fi is available, I still want to get information from them. So if that's the basic connect piece, where this starts to get a little more interesting for me, we start looking at things like passerbys. So what is a passerby? It's that idea that if a visitor is an unassociated client and a connected user is somebody that connected to my Wi-Fi, this passerby is somebody that's in that state. They didn't connect to my network, but I'm using the location service, either triangulating through AIL and figuring out that they're not in my facility, or just looking for things like receive signal strength. So I hear you're on one of my perimeter APs, or I hear you from a perimeter AP, but I hear you at a signal strength of -90, so I can deduce that you're not in my venue. I'll use this, as Ozer said, kind of looking at it from the retail side. I want to keep track of what my opportunity is, how many people pass by my venue. If I'm a retail customer, what was my opportunity? How many people could I pull into my Starbucks? The airports that I talked to, I'm just keeping track of how many people came by to drop off passengers. I still want to know total counts. We'll look at it a couple of different ways. I may integrate in with video surveillance, CCTV type systems to do car counting and those kind of things. But I still want to keep track of not just how many cars, but how many people or how many devices came in through there. I take all this, and one of the key pieces that I'm going to gather out of that is what's my window conversion. So if I had these passerbys, if I saw people here, and we can get into a lot of questions, and I probably should have phrased that starting off. If you guys have any questions, interrupt me, and happy to deal with them as they come up when I'm changing through different topics. But the idea is with a passerby, I've seen you're a probing device. Your device may only probe once every 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 30 minutes, depending on battery life, right? So I have a small window to try and do something. Window conversion could be the old marketing display. I've got signage on the window. I've got some sort of display I'm going to try and lure you in. It may be kind of the more overt, I want to send a push notification, or I want to do something to let you know, hey, Jake's a coffee addict, so come on in and I'll give you some coffee and we'll do it at a deal. My window conversion then is measuring that. I saw you out as a passerby long enough to fit a set of demographics that you've labeled. I want a minimum time, I want a maximum time, I want a signal strength, something that allows me to target that you're a passerby. I took some action, and then as a consequence of that action, now you came into my store. So you transition from being a passerby where you're not in the venue to now being inside the venue. So we'll track that, and I'll get into that a little bit more as we talk about engagements, but the key piece for us is anytime I do an engagement, anytime I take an action, I want to measure how effective that action was. And that could be something like custom-coded QR codes. If I'm sending in a retail example, coupons and trying to drive a change in behavior, how many of those coupons came back, and can I track, this is the coupon that I sent Ryan, or this is the coupon that I sent George, and did they actually follow through with it? As we get into more of the analytics then, so using that data, we get some of the basic pieces around visitor recency, so how often do people come? I'm looking for things like loyalty, right? How recent were their visits? How frequent are they? So if I'm Starbucks, this counts my visits and number of visits per day and things like that. I may be in a Starbucks too many times in the course of a day. How often do I connect to Wi-Fi? How recent? How much data am I using? So some interesting pieces that allow me to see kind of how my network is being used. This is going to be similar to what we would see off of a network management console, but the idea is I'm framing it a little bit different. It's data, it's analytics, it's anonymized so that I'm not necessarily keeping track of here's what Charlie does on my network or anybody else that comes on, but I'm looking for the trends. I want to take this, I want to take it a step further and look at the demographic information so I can look at men versus women, I can look at this age range versus that age range, a new customer versus a returning customer, et cetera. We get some interesting pieces, again, I'll use as part of the analytics, the profiling that happens at the network layer. So we look at DHCP fingerprinting, those kind of things. I want to understand what types of devices, how is my network being used by my visitors. Again, so maybe it helps me decide when my next AP refresh comes or what type of content I want to put out via an email. And then as we start expanding into the capabilities that come off of AIL, that come out of AOS 8 with the API feeds, now I can start to take data like what Aruba provides inside of AppRF and start capturing additional information. Again, I'm not keeping track of Charlie went and searched these particular commerce sites, but I want to go back and look to see, you're on my network, where are you going? If I'm a retail customer, am I being showroomed? If I'm a healthcare customer, is somebody going back and either filling out a prescription through the pharmacy, or are they going back to the health board and complaining about something that happened here? We're looking at it, and again, keeping trends, and I may use this as an actionable event as we get down the road. And then finally, some things like data usage. How's my network being utilized? Getting the pie charts, et cetera. The interesting thing here is I can dig into any of these pieces of information. So I can click in on one of the widgets in the dashboard, get into my tables. We're looking at this as a time vector. So I can come back and look for things. Right now I'm looking at it over a 30-day window. We can zoom in on as short as a 1 day. I can zoom out as far as a year. I may go back and look for things like how are we over the last week. But I've got the ability to set up emails if I'm looking for trends and going from there on having it. I can also go back and have the entire dashboard sent to me as an email. So the thinking, I may have somebody that's in maintenance that maybe they don't care as much about the total sessions or registrations, et cetera. They can pull out their widgets, have this email to me on a regular basis. And with anything where I'm using the analytics to try and change behavior, it's all about having that baseline. So I want to do some measuring, I want to see how things are going, I want to implement a change, and then see how that change went. So if I take the insights one step further, we'll get to things where now I can start to do some interesting pieces again, looking at how my facility is being used. And in this case, I'm looking at visitor flow. So we've gone through, I think we're all familiar with heat maps. I'll use them inside of Ekahau to do a predictive survey. I use them inside of Airwave if I'm doing network management. I want to see where my APs are active, what's down. I can do the client locating and troubleshooting from there. My use case is going to be a little bit different. So I'm identifying different zones, and I want to keep track of, again, behaviors. So in this case, I might be a mall property and I want to look at, for my returning users, so people that I've seen come to the mall more than once, what's their primary way into the facility? An airport likes to look at this and see, where are people parking their cars? How do I get in? What entrances are used? What parking garages are more favorable, et cetera. I can highlight over my different zones, and I can look for things like dwell time for this particular zone. So if I had the widget before that shows on average, here's how long people tend to stay in my facility, now I can start to break it out and figure out, again, if I'm an airport, what does my TSA security line look like? What is that average dwell time or that average wait there? Using the airport example again, I could go back and look for things like, if I connect in through this particular location, here's how many people actually drop off and go somewhere else. So if I had you as a passerby, you did the drive-through to drop off your family member as they were on the flight out of town, or you guys were on the flight here. If somebody actually came in, did they come into ticketing and then turn around and leave?
Charlie?
Yep.
Can you look back upstream the same way and to say, given a certain area, where did users come from to get to this place?
It builds out, so I can look for things.
Yeah, similar to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So as you're stepping through, we can look at the return site. And the other interesting piece, so good point. I can also turn around and break it down and look for things like, instead of new versus returning user, break it down into genders and look for those types of trends. So the idea being, if I wanted to see, great, so how many people come into the food court, and then where do they go from the food court, or how many people go from a different entrance out to other sites, we can go through there. And this starts to get a little busy if I don't turn off the other locations that we had, but you guys get the idea. So this is interesting to show me, again, it's all based on the analytics. You potentially didn't connect to the Wi-Fi at all. This is going to be more accurate if I got you connected to Wi-Fi, so it's up to me to give you a compelling reason to get on Wi-Fi. But this shows me kind of how the venue's being used and go from in that historical context. The other piece that I think is interesting is we'll jump into a heat map. Again, very similar to something that you might see in Airwave or in Meridian. The difference being, this is just plotting user density, and it's looking at it over hourly samples. But again, if I'm trying to change this behavior, I want to look for things like, I know this is a bank of escalators. Why is it so dense in that bank of escalators? In this case, I've got a sliding scale. Red means I've got almost 1,000 people in there in that hourly sample. But I can look around, I've got another set of escalators here, there's hardly anybody there, I've got escalators down there, there's nobody there. Why is that bank of escalators so important to me? And I may not know initially, but this idea, again, starting with the baseline, I'm looking to identify a problem or looking to identify something that I want to take action on. And we can go back and use this then to identify, maybe I need to improve signage. I need to let people know through digital signage, through emails, whatever, that there's another escalator bank. Maybe the problem is that I've got a bank of escalators that aren't currently working. But I'm able to capture this trend, and then I could go back and say, well, if this was today's date, what did this actually look like if I back up 2 months ago? And go back and do a replay on the same event. And actually for this side, I know it's going to be about the same. But it gives me those trends, right? So it shows me what's going on and how it's being used. The compelling point, I think, when we're going through this is ultimately it all comes down to, what do I do with this data? So it's the third piece off the slide that I'd mentioned previously where we talk about engage. Engagement is basically taking a digital response. So that could be an email, it could be an SMS, it could be triggering digital signage, it could be doing a pushback through the Meridian app, it could be feeding another system via external API. So we take these API feeds in from Meridian, from Ale. We can turn around and ship API feeds back out to trigger digital signage in other places. But it gives me a bit more control over what I want to define my target is. So again, this is looking at it from a guest Wi-Fi experience, but a lot of this data could have been fed up through ClearPass. It could have been an end user authenticating against Active Directory, and so part of what I'm going to capture is departments instead of languages, or different groups or different set of access rights versus countries and languages spoken. I'm then going to build my content. On the content side, this is where we'll go back and create things like, I want to go create a passbook coupon. So I mentioned we want to engage with users. I can send an email, I can let people know what's going on, I can send an SMS, and there's different reasons or different thought processes behind what we would do. But it basically gives me a templated approach to go back and say, I'm not a marketing guy, I don't know anything about setting up a barcode, but I can come through here, pick out what I want to set up, what type of coupon does this need to be, what my colors need to look like, all that good stuff, what type of barcode do I want to use, and it ends up creating that customized, unique barcode per engagement. And then ultimately, I create the engagement itself. This is the triggered event. This is what do I want to do. And I can step through it. I mentioned a couple of different pieces already. You've got the idea of a bulk engagement, so it's an email. I've categorized based off people that are on my network or have connected to guests. I can look for things like, let me jump in here. I can look for things like, when was the last time you were on? How often have you been on the network? Where did you last connect from? We're using a lot of different triggers to identify what makes sense. So if I'm looking at it more in the marketing context, the big use case was always, to use the coffee example earlier, if I know I have a caffeine addiction or a caffeine problem and I'm always at Starbucks, I might use the example of I want to detect the next time I'm close to a Starbucks, and then we're going to do a push notification to prod me that, hey, come on in and get another caffeine fix. If I expand that a step further, I could use this in that retail space that says, hey, I sell big screen TVs, so when I see Ryan come in, let's go ahead and send him a push notification and let him know I got a discount on 70-inch TVs. Come on in and buy 3. The challenge, though, is what if Ryan had already decided that he wanted to buy that TV, he was coming in and was headed back there. Do I really want to send him a push notification and say, I'm going to give you a discount on something you were already going to buy? I'll give you a discount because I like you. But the idea is this needs to be time sensitive and it needs to be dependent on what's going on. I don't need to change behavior, or in that case, if Ryan was already walking back to the big screen TVs to buy a TV, that's not a behavior I want to change. We'll let that play out. If I'm stuck in an elevator and I've got my zone identified as an elevator and we recognize that my visit duration is now in 10 minutes, that's unusual. I shouldn't be in an elevator for 10 minutes. I'm probably at the WLAN Pros conference in Dallas and stuck in an elevator and singing songs on Twitter. So we can take some kind of action about it, right?
Already.
The other piece that I think is critical, I've got a couple of apps that I like to make fun of, but it's an outdoor wholesaler that likes to send me 5 push notifications at a time. When they have a sale, they've got to let me know they got boots on sale, they got kayaks on sale, they have all this stuff on sale. I don't necessarily want to do that. That type of behavior is going to more likely turn people off, have them either uninstall my app or at least turn notifications off. So I want to be able to do smart things like rate limit it, kind of set a priority. If I have 3 different things that make sense, so George walks into my store and I could hit him with 3 different things. I got cowboy hats, boots, and belts. Let's prioritize and pick which one's important. Send that one first, and then maybe the next one waits. And the next one can wait a week, it can wait whatever, or I want to hit a couple of different things at once. So that's the engagement side. Any questions kind of about it? I appreciate the ones that we have had.
Does this require Aruba OS 8 to get this functionality?
It does not. So we've been an Aruba partner for about 4.5 years. The primary piece that we're taking from is AIL. We've always used AIL as the location piece. We've had the tie-in for Airwave to pull heat maps over and those kind of things. With AOS 8, we start to open up new sources of context about the user. It's really identified around, I want to get beyond just being guest and retail Wi-Fi and start looking for other verticals like, does this make sense in healthcare? Does it make sense in education? And so I'm not necessarily getting a captive portal feed. The AppRF feed's another one. So if I'm in an education environment, maybe I'm not looking for, are you hitting a commerce site? I want to know if you're hitting a social media or a chat site. This is test day, and we're doing standardized tests, so you shouldn't be hitting these other types of sites. It's taking that type of context, that type of data feed from the infrastructure, and allowing us to see more about what's going on and then react accordingly. So short answer is no, but it definitely plays better.
Kind of a simple question back related to the heat map you showed a second ago. That kind of showed a snapshot in time.
Right.
can you aggregate that over a time period as well, to say a custom time period, to say in a given day, business day or given week or whatever, can you customize that heat map that way?
Right now, no. It's showing you on a day sample, but I like that idea. So kind of looking at for the course of a day, or potentially even bigger if I'm looking at it over like the course of a week.
Or even, one of the interesting things about looking at data like that is, sometimes you don't want that information averaged for off business hours as well. So maybe even looking at it during business hours only, Monday through Friday for this week. The kind of customization would be cool.
Yeah. So one of the things that comes into the analytics side is also looking at. So again, those numbers, we would kind of tend to look at them as being raw numbers coming off an AL feed. We do have the intelligence on the back end to try and differentiate to say, and this got to be fun with the airports, but what defines a visitor versus an employee? So in a retail environment, in a mall environment, unless you're my wife and can go shop for 4 hours, if you're there for 4 hours or longer, you're probably an employee working. One of the other fun things is, as a mall owner, I may have all the common areas, but I don't have in store itself. If I may have a Neiman Marcus, I may have some other big box stores. So you could potentially go into an area for an extended amount of time, do your shopping, you're getting fitted for clothes or whatever, and then when you come back in the mall, do I see that as being a new visit? Do I count you as being, man, he's really loyal, he comes back and every hour and a half I see him again, this guy likes me? Or is it just part of the same trip? So part of the analytics is looking at that number, and if I'm looking back at the dashboard, I'll see kind of a connected right now, here's my visitor count. We'll ultimately end up smoothing over that data to provide the historical pieces that say, okay, well, I was looking at this, and actually for those 4 visits that I thought I saw you had in one day, if you look at it over, in hindsight, this was really probably 1 visit, so let's go update those counters.
Are those kind of on-off buttons for an algorithm, or is some of that more granularly customizable? For example, maybe I have some kind of a presence indicator at the employee entrance. I can flag all my employees coming through them. If I come through that door, then I know that they're employees or their staff.
So it's multiple pieces. It's not an on-off switch, but there could be those different data points. If I see you 3 days in a row, then you might be an employee and not a consumer. But yeah.
Charlie, healthcare. Have you deployed it in healthcare? If so, what kind of alerts are you driving? What are some use cases? Because we're struggling with that, right?
Yep.
Because HIPAA, collecting information.
Right.
We want to avoid all that.
Yep.
At all costs. But I'm just curious. Any feedback on healthcare installations or potential healthcare installations where you want to drive? Maybe you're going past the gift shop or.
Right. So in today's setup, if I was talking to something we deploy today, it would be purely from that retail perspective, where I'm trying to find, okay, here's people coming through, and I'm going to work in conjunction with a Meridian app that's helping me with wayfinding, and I want to recognize that you're coming by a gift shop or you're coming by the cafeteria and do something. Ultimately, I think we take that a step further, and now I'm using the heat maps to identify, here are my guests versus here are my doctors, or here are my staff that I have. And we want to take things, again, like Meridian, where at Atmosphere last year we had the Find My Friend. Well, that could turn into Find My Doctor, or Find a Doctor if I need to keep this anonymized, so I'm not pointing out particular people. The big challenge is that we're looking at it from an anonymized feed where it's not keeping track of, here's what Charlie did, but I want to know if I need help, here's somebody that can help me, and where do we go? Or here's a concentration of patients, and there's no nurses around, or there's no administrative people around, we need to send some additional people over there. So a couple of ideas, and then just looking at it again kind of at a high level, monitoring protocol. So if doctors are coming into rooms, can I have a zone set up that's near the sink to make sure they're washing their hands, or they're hitting the pharmacy and dispensing what they need to do, and just kind of tracking that overall. What is the time each doctor is, or not each doctor, what's the time staff are spending in a room, and I'm tying that back to my healthcare patient SAT scores to make sure that are we getting the type of attention or the type of interaction with the patients that we'd expect to see, and how do I follow up and verify that with metrics? Okay. Any other questions before I wrap up? Okay. Well, I appreciate your time.
Thank you.